What's up, folks? Welcome back to Tactical Tortoise. My name is Trevi. I guess it's Traveling Tortoise again today. I'm back with some more FAQs coming out this week. Of course, everything came out as soon as I left my office and began traveling, but we have a new Tyranid FAQ, which is covering all of the questions that we've had for the Tyranid Codex. Now, I actually wrote together over the past weekend. I spent a long time on it, an embarrassing amount of time, on about a 10-page script talking about all of the issues with the Tyranid Codex, and this FAQ does take care of a lot of those. So, fortunately, no need for that script anymore, and I'm glad that we're back to a faster release cadence for these FAQs because in the past, for the last couple of codexes, they have been a really long time coming. And this is going to hopefully curb a lot of the most powerful combinations in the Tyranid Codex and really, just make the game better. I think that there are still going to be some balance that needs to be taken into account for Tyranids, but this codex is gonna kind of knock the edges, or this FAQ, excuse me, is gonna knock the edges off the most powerful combinations in the army. Now, I think off the top of my head, the one thing that this doesn't cover is the swarming masses ability, which currently doesn't do anything. So that's a little bit awkward. We also have a couple other open questions, sort of regarding the core rules of how the Codex operates. There's a lot of ways to create new units in the Tyranid Codex, and it's unclear whether or not those units are considered to be reinforcements, since reinforcements have to have started off the table and then are placed on the table after the game begins. And the units created by the Tyranid Codex they do not exist within the game until they're on the table. So that currently has not been addressed. But otherwise, we'll talk about everything that changed inside the codex, inside the FAQ here. First off, Hive Nexus has been eroded to only target core units. So you can no longer use the Hive Nexus on monsters. You can't, for example, send a Harpy into the Tyranid Prime's Guide Mind Imperative to give exploding sixes. You can't use the Maleceptor Imperative on itself, although with some of the other changes in this FAQ, that's not actually that going to be that big of a deal. So that's curbs the power of Hive Nexus quite a bit, and that was certainly the reason, generally speaking, that you took Hive Fleet Leviathan, was to get access to that power. That was definitely the most powerful ability that Hive Fleet Leviathan had access to. Power of the Hive Mind was errated to only impact Psyker character units, so you can full stop not use it on Maleceptors. I guess Zoanthropes, which means that unfortunately the Zoanthropes' second power is almost never going to be used now because their smite is just so good and so consistent that you're almost always going to be using that smite. Overrun has also been changed to not be a convoluted mess of a rule. Now it no longer replaces a consolidation move. It's simply at the end of the fight phase, you make a move if you're not engaged, and as long as you charge that turn. So great, sick. All right, we no longer have to go ask a TO if we're going to be allowed to use Overrun every time it comes up in a game. Encircle the Prey, big change here. This is clearly the most powerful stratagem in the Codex. Previously allowed you to pick a unit up off the table at the end of your turn. Because it was out of phase, you could use it multiple times, and obviously it allowed the unit to operate normally for an entire turn and then leave. And that's, that was not okay. It did help quite a bit in some situations. For example, if a Hive Tyrant failed a charge, you could pull it off the table and preserve it for another turn. It did allow you to play very aggressively with the Encircle the Prey kind of in the chamber. And even if you got a little bit diced, you could still, pull your units off the table and remove them from harm. And that's going to be the one capacity where I'm sad to see this go. But there were a lot of really abusive situations where, because it was, end of turn, not only could you use it multiple times, you could use it on units like aircraft that were going to be moving very aggressively across the table, and that normally would get killed after they move. But also, you could use it after you scored a maneuver secondaries. So you could, for example, run a unit into the center of the table, perform actions, and score Stranglehold or something like that, and then remove it from the table. Or you could move units into all the table quarters and then remove them from the table. It was just too powerful, and I'm glad to see it eroded. Spore Nodes has been changed so that it doesn't literally blue screen the game anymore. There was an issue where if you set up a situation, because you had to place the Spore Node marker within an inch of the unit that was performing the action, and also wholly within the opponent's deployment zone, but you could start to perform the action 6 inches outside your opponent's deployment zone, you could set up a situation where the marker had to be placed, but had no legal position to be placed, and the game just ended. It was kind of like that Necron stratagem that ended the game. And now it just goes within 1 inch of the unit. It doesn't have to go into your opponent's deployment zone, which is just fine. The marker is basically just there to make it more difficult to perform multiple Spore Node actions, and so that you can't sort of hole up in a safe position within 6 inches of your opponent's zone and continue to perform the action endlessly. You have to then move away from the previous Spore Node token. Synapse has been changed to be an aura. Okay. All right, sure. I guess it was already an aura, because aura abilities are sort of borked in 40k, but at least it has a little tag now. Hive Tyrants have been changed so that you can only equip one Venom Cannon, or one Heavy Venom Cannon, excuse me. Battleship Tyrant is dead, unfortunately, but I think a lot of people were taking single Shard Gullet plus melee weapons, so they could play a little bit more of a flexible game plan. That's actually where I was gravitating towards, but there were some builds using double Heavy Venom Cannon, along with the Pathogenesis, I think, the relic that extends the range and gives you a reroll to get some very consistent Heavy Venom Cannon shooting. All of those pretty good, but unfortunately illegal now, so you can't do that. Zoanthropes got their Synapse keyword back, so they can now actually project the Synaptic Link and and contribute their Synaptic Imperative, which you could not choose beforehand, which is pretty awkward. Tyrannicites are dedicated transports. They were listed as dedicated transports in the points section of the codex, but their icon was heavy support, which is a little bit awkward. Generally speaking, you use the points section for battlefield role selection, so that wasn't that big of a deal. People knew where it was supposed to be, but it was a little bit awkward. Aerial seating now has a 9-inch positional restriction when you set up the unit on the table. That was borked in the initial version because it used a copy-paste of the drop pod rule, but the drop pod rule in the Space Marine Codex refers to Death from Above, which is the Space Marine ability to deep strike. So you placed it as if it had the Death from Above special rule, which required you to be 9 inches outside of enemy units. And the Tyranid Codex does not have that. The only deep strike rule built into the Tyranid Codex is Death from Below, and I imagine that there's some top-down game designer at Games Workshop who's like, oh, we can't reference Death from Below in a unit being fired from orbit, so we just won't put in a 9-inch restriction. So you could put drop pod or Tyrannicites anywhere you wanted on the table outside of engagement range of enemies. Oftentimes it would make it so that the units disembarking from them would die, because they themselves had to be 9 inches outside of enemies, even though the transport didn't. But I'm glad that that's been cleared up. It was a little bit broken. For 100 points, you could take an OPSEC unit that automatically stole your opponent's directives, which is, I don't know, pretty good. I like that Molochs can do it, and that should be solidly in the Molochs purview, essentially. Adaptive physiologies have been basically reinforced to not target character units, which is nuts to me. Enraged Reserves, which is also referenced here as well, it seems to me to be specifically targeting character units because it gives you a free use of Death Surge, which is the most expensive stratagem that it can unlock. Otherwise, there are a couple that you can use once per game, but they aren't very good. And it's wild to me that can't be used on characters, because that definitely feels like the use case to me for that adaptive physiology. But they've decided no, I guess. Sure. I guess, Warlord trait plus adaptive physiology plus relic on a Tyranid character would be a little bit too much flexibility for a Tyranid character. I don't know if that's the reasoning, but that's what we got. Some FAQs here. Enraged Reserves does not double wounds for Psychic Overload on a Maliceptor. I think that's to be expected. No one played it that way because that's not how that rule has worked ever. Double wounds for bracketing never affects additional abilities that the unit has, only literally its statistics. That's the way it works for things like Silent King as well. We also have a question about psychic actions, whether or not they eat a cast. The answer is that they do. And this was an open question that was, I honestly would sort of have been cleared up by this change to both Hive Nexus and Power of the Hive Mind, because there was basically no way to eke an additional cast out of the Maliceptor while performing actions. But honestly, I think this ruling borks a lot of other stratagems in the game, and that's really a problem with this open question, because if a psychic power, or if a psychic action, excuse me, eats a cast, there are a lot of other abilities in 40k that allow you to use psychic powers and cast spells outside of the Tyranid Codex. For example, Eldari have a stratagem for it, as well as Thousand Suns, I believe, have a way to do it as well. And in both those situations, I believe that this FAQ will come into play and mean that those effects basically don't matter for single casters, because you would have already eaten your psychic cast if your action takes it up. So, for example, you have one cast, you use a stratagem to be able to do a psychic power and a psychic action, but the psychic action eats both. So you can't do anything else with that guy. It's a little bit clunky and awkward, and I think the way that the rule is written doesn't support that, but Games Workshop's FAQs have. That's the way they want to play it, I guess, but I don't necessarily believe in that. I think the other changes to the Tyranid psychic phase were more than enough to sort of alleviate that problem, but I don't know. Anyway, that's going to be it for me today, everybody. Just really wanted to knock out a quick commentary on this new Tyranid FAQ. This is a really big deal, and I'm glad that Games Workshop has leapt on this codex real quick, because it has been, especially with all of the other codexes getting nerfed to the data slate, Tyranids have been absolutely dominant, and with really no sign of slowing down. And especially after US Open Seattle last weekend was just run a train on by Tyranids. I think Games Workshop really had a fire under their butts to get this fixed, and I'm glad they have. So it looks very good. Anyway, come hang out with me this weekend over on twitch.tv/DeathOrGloryWargaming. I'm going to be doing commentary with the Death or Glory Wargaming team for Motor City Mayhem, a 180-person 40k major. It's going to be awesome. I'm going to be live all weekend, and I'm just psyched about it. So thanks, everyone, and remember to keep it classy, folks, and have happy wargaming.